What can I say about 1977's Guyslugger that hasn't already been said? We've heard it all before. Guyslugger changed my life. Guyslugger cured my depression. Guyslugger is the only good magical girl anime. There's nothing new or innovative a YouTuber can say about Guyslugger, and the only reason I'm making this video is because I want the AdSense money so I can finally see my kids again. I am beholden to the will of a professional Guyslopper. Now let's just pretend that, hypothetically, Guyslugger wasn't one of the most popular and over-discussed anime ever, and that I was talking to an audience that doesn't even know what a Guyslugger is. Well, Guyslugger opens in Antarctica, where Dr. Shiki, director of the National Geological Survey, is voyaging out into a blizzard for National Geological Survey-related purposes. Suddenly, a UFO appears and attacks him. This attack unearths a spaceship frozen beneath the ice containing 5 crew members sleeping in hibernation, and also kills his dog. This is the Guyslugger team. The cyborgs introduce themselves to Dr. Shiki, and they reveal they are from the ancient civilization Solon. This futuristic civilization turned them into cyborgs to fight against an invasion from aliens called the Inbem. On the day the team entered hibernation, the kingdom of Solon was wiped out by a global catastrophe as Earth entered its ice age, and the team was sealed in their ship until present day. The Guyslugger team warns Dr. Shiki that the UFO that attacked him was the same kind used by the Inbem. Dr. Shiki tells them there have been growing reports of flying saucers over the last few decades, and the cyborgs explain that this can only mean one thing: the Inbem have returned to Earth to invade once again. Also, sorry for killing your dog, we'll rebuild him as a cyborg. From here, the show becomes episodic, following the Guyslugger team as they thwart the plans of the Inbem Empire with mixed results. Guyslugger was created by Kamen Rider and Guyslugger creator Shotaro Ishinomori, and shares many traits with his arguably most popular manga, Cyborg 009, often making very on-the-nose allusions to the series. The Guyslugger team are tragic heroes, par for the course for Ishinomori, as they're warriors with no place to call home. In episode 1, Kayamito says, "If Solon is dead, who should I fight for?" Echoing the mantra of Cyborg 009, "Cyborg soldier, who are you fighting for?" There's also a nod to Kamen Rider in episode 2. Ken accidentally hurts Dr. Shiki's son Hiroshi while shaking his hand as he hasn't acclimated to his cyborg strength. The Guyslugger team consists of 5 cyborgs referred to as cybernoids. The leader, Ken Shiki, is in charge of piloting the Solon ship. His design is based on Joe from Cyborg 009, and he has the same last name as Dr. Shiki. His appearance is also similar to Dr. Shiki's son, Hiroshi. That said, a familial connection is never confirmed, which I highly suspect is due to an unresolved plot point, but we'll come back to that. Second in command is Kayamito. His design is based on Cyborg 007, but his personality and abilities are based on Cyborg 004. Riki Ono is the muscle of the team, and notably the most remodeled of all the cyborgs. He's even quite racistly mistaken for a robot by Dr. Shiki when they first meet. He's somewhat similar to Cyborg 005, but this is where the comparisons get a little muddy. We get to see what he looked like in his human form, but only during the ending sequence, and like Ken's last name, this is something I'll get back to later. Taro Yi is the youngest member of the team. He's a boy genius who does information analysis and builds weapons, but the closest comparison to Cyborg 009 is probably 001, but really the only similarity is the child genius aspect. It's not a strong connection. Finally, we have Maritani, who is in charge of repairs and, according to her character description, also participates in fights. She's kind of similar to 003, but she doesn't have a romantic relationship with the main character, which just makes her less interesting. One of the biggest influences for the series, aside from Cyborg 009, was the explosion of interest in ancient civilizations, aliens, and out-of-place artifacts of the late 70s. TV shows and anime about these mysterious subjects were becoming very popular, and around this time we'd see an influx of shows where the villains were aliens invading Earth in flying saucers, like in Gaiken and Voltes 5. There's a lot more examples, but I won't name every one of them, even though I could. Even the show that aired in Guyslugger's time slot before it was an Ishinomori tokusatsu called Chojin Bibyun, which was riding this wave, being about heroes who were reincarnated from demons and fought against yokai. Ishinomori was already a huge fan of paranormal investigation, and would even sometimes break the fourth wall in his own manga to discuss real-world cases of paranormal occurrences. With this in mind, flying saucers and ancient civilizations were made key elements of the series, and expanding from there were other mysteries added like Easter Island heads, the Karnak stones, the pyramids of Giza, and World War II kamikaze attacks. The Cyborg 009 homages are pretty obtuse in Guyslugger, and this isn't just a case of Ishinomori recycling ideas either. A show that looks and feels like Cyborg 009 is exactly what Toei wanted. Following the success of Kamen Rider, Ishinomori and Toei began mass-producing superhero shows throughout the early 70s. The Henshin boom, if you're so inclined to call it that. From July of 1976 to March of 77, NET, now known as TV Asahi, aired the aforementioned Chojin Bibyun, which was a sequel to Ishinomori's earlier tokusatsu series, Akumizer 3. After Chojin Bibyun was set to conclude, a new Ishinomori hero show, Kaiketsu Zubat, was meant to take Bibyun's time slot. However, when TV Tokyo's Ninja Captor was cancelled, Zubat was given to them to fill the time slot. NET needed a replacement show to fill that time slot after Chojin Bibyun, so Toei's television department and Ishinomori would create Guyslugger, making Guyslugger one of those incredibly rare post-David Bowie's Low but pre-David Bowie's Heroes anime. Toei's television department was a division of Toei that mostly developed live-action dramas and tokusatsu, though dabbling in the world of animation wasn't necessarily unheard of. Regardless, they are a different entity than Toei Animation, or Toei Doga as it was called, and most of the actual animation for Guyslugger was outsourced to TMS. This outsourcing would lead to Guyslugger having inconsistent animation, with some episodes having beautiful animation done by legendary animators Yoshinori Kanada and Osamu Nabeshima, while other episodes were done by Studio Oka, who not only animated the worst episodes of the series, but they reused this animation in Tsuburaya's Eisenborg. Can I get some fresh fucking rats, please? As I mentioned earlier, the similarities to Cyborg 009 are intentional. Throughout its history, 009 was published in a handful of different magazines, and serialization only became more sporadic during the 70s when Ishinomori was creating a million shows for Toei. During this busy time for Ishinomori, when and where you might see the next Cyborg 009 story was anyone's guess. 1971 to 72 saw 2 one-shots published in Medium 1 and Funkinder TV, both of which were short gag comics. Then, after 3 years of nothing, the series returned to serialization with 3 new arcs in Shokami, a shoujo magazine. In 1976, we'd see the end of the Eda arc in Shokami, and 2 one-shots, Deinonychus, published in Monthly Shonen Jump, and Green Hole, published in Play magazine. In 1977, the year Guyslugger premiered, it was announced that 009 would return to regular serialization in Monthly Shonen magazine, with a new story arc being hyped up as the penultimate arc of the manga, and Toei hoped that this new anime about a cyborg team would ride the hype. So why didn't it? Guyslugger failed for 2 reasons: poor timing and being boring as fuck. Aesthetically, the show is bland, the greatest offender of this being the villains of the series. The usual setup for a show in this era is that there will be one main antagonist serving as a dictator, with several generals serving under him, with each general having a unique personality and theme. These generals don't often get along with each other, like the conflict between Baron Ashura and Count Bracken from Mazinger. In Guyslugger, there is one general, Dagus. He's a calm and cautious general, which would make him interesting if his calm and collected personality was in contrast to other villains he was competing with. Dagus' design doesn't feel unique enough for a memorable villain, especially when you read through books like Ishinomori After 1975, and you see all the cool and unique designs he was making at the time for shows like Chojin Bibyun, Zubat, and Daitetsujin 17. Maybe it's because he had so many projects he couldn't contribute much to Guyslugger, so most of the enemies have simple and unremarkable designs. In fact, they remind me a bit of Leader L from Zubat, which makes me feel like Guyslugger was just an afterthought compared to these other shows coming out at the same time. Not that Ishinomori didn't want to be involved with it, but that it wasn't his priority. We don't see the character who serves the dictator role until episode 17, when we're introduced to Babel Bem Imbem, the emperor of the planet Imbem. Babel, who looks like a Frankenstein monster, orders his brothers Galba and Zolba to go to battle, and we get what could have been the start of some interesting interplay between the villains, even if their designs are boring as hell. Unfortunately, these 2 are killed by the end of the episode. One even gets a rock thrown through his brain. This is probably the best fight in the show, considering most enemies are copy and paste grunts defeated by the team using their generic blasters or ramming them with the Solon ship. There was also the issue of timing. Guyslugger dropped amid a boom in robot animation, airing at the same time as the end of Toei's Combattler V and start of Voltes 5. It was at this time that sponsors, TV networks, and young children, the demographic Guyslugger was aiming for, almost exclusively wanted to see shows about giant robots. A month before Guyslugger started, Toei would premiere Daitetsujin 17, the first giant robot-centric series from creator Shotaro Ishinomori, and Toei's first giant robot tokusatsu since Giant Robo. It's not to say every series needed a robot to be successful, but it was a dominating trend, and if you planned to go up against such an oppressive force, you needed to be equipped. Guyslugger producer Takeyuki Suzuki even stated that he believed the explosion of robot anime in the late 70s happened as a result of the henshin boom of the early 70s, with children losing interest in ordinary superheroes due to their oversaturation. 2 years after Guyslugger, Suzuki would work as a producer on the second Cyborg 009 TV adaptation, and that adaptation also ran into problems. While the show had dedicated fans, the merchandise just didn't sell. The major toy associated with the series was the Dolphin II ship used by the cyborg soldiers. However, they only ever use it for transport and never for battle, so kids didn't feel incentivized to buy the toy. There were discussions about incorporating the Dolphin II into combat scenarios, but Ishinomori was against this as he felt it would minimize the importance of the individual characters. This resulted in the show's cancellation, leaving the main antagonist Odin undefeated. My point being that if Cyborg 009, an established franchise with a large and enduring fanbase, couldn't overcome the stigma of no robot get cancelled, Guyslugger didn't stand a chance. For as much as Guyslugger does wrong, it's not a complete waste of time. There are a few aspects of the show that are worth commending. Episode 14 is an emotionally resonant episode of the series, Oh My Motherland. This episode follows a race of aliens called the Moloka, who escaped from Inbem captivity to Earth. One of the Moloka aliens explains how the Inbem murdered their race, and he wants Earth to join forces with him and fight against them. Earth denies this request as they're reluctant to initiate a battle with the Inbem, believing the Moloka and Guysluggers won't be strong enough to defeat them. The Guyslugger team feels powerless, and the episode ends with the Moloka aliens launching a kamikaze attack on the Inbem, allowing the Guysluggers an opening to take down one of their ships. It's not the first episode of Guyslugger to feature a tragic character of the week, but it certainly gives a sense that this is when the team feels the most powerless, and it sets up an arc that is resolved in the final episode of the series. The next episode is also a significant one for two reasons. First, it's one of 3 episodes to feature animation by renowned action animator Yoshinori Kanada. The second reason this episode is significant is because the plot revolves around the Inbem kidnapping humans and implanting them with bombs, turning them into suicide bombers. You've probably already noticed the similarities to Zambot 3's infamous Human Bomb episode, but interestingly enough, this episode of Guyslugger premiered about 6 months before Zambot's episode. And that episode of Zambot is also notable for featuring animation by Yoshinori Kanada. Guyslugger has some other notable staff, like series director Nobuo Ishiguro. Ishiguro had previously worked on Space Battleship Yamato and would later go on to found Studio Artland, where he'd direct the Super Dimension Fortress Macross and its film Do You Remember Love? Takeyuki Suzuki described Ishiguro as a calm and quiet person, very different from Combatler V's director Tadao Nagahama, who Suzuki would work with the next year on Tosho Daimos. While this is entirely speculation, I do have to wonder if the Solon ship plunging its beak into Inbem ships in almost every episode somehow inspired the Macross ship's Daedalus attack. The voice cast is also stocked with revered talents like Toru Furuya. I started writing this video like years ago. Akira Kamiya as Kaya and Norio Wakamoto as Riki. In the case of Norio Wakamoto, this was his first credited voice acting role, and years later he'd go on to voice another prominent Ishinomori cyborg, Cyborg 009's main antagonist, the Skull. Wakamoto's performance as the Skull in the 2001 anime is iconic, especially since it's the only time the character had a speaking role in a Cyborg 009 animation outside the 60s version, where his relevance to the plot was entirely diminished. Wakamoto would even reprise this role in the 2007 adaptation of Ishinomori's The Skull Man. Dr. Shiki also has a notable voice actor in Shozo Izuka. While most anime fans probably know him for voicing roles like Nappa on Dragon Ball Z or Ryu Jose in Gundam, He also voiced Hakaider in the tokusatsu version of Ishinomori's android Kakaider. In the year 2000, when Kakaider was adapted into animation, he'd return as the voice of Dr. Komyoji, and there's a cool Easter egg near the end of the series where Dr. Komyoji takes control of Hakaider's body, so in a way, Iizuka gets to sort of reprise his role as the voice of Hakaider. I mentioned earlier that the show heavily suggests that Ken has a familial connection to Dr. Shiki, but this is never elaborated on in the actual show. Presumably, it was planned to be revealed that there were survivors of the Solon civilization, and that those survivors became modern-day humans. Dr. Shiki is a descendant of Ken, and how they managed to retain this family name after 30,000 years is just 70s anime logic. I also suspect that Riki Ono's human design seen in the ED for the show would have appeared in the actual anime, with the cybernoids possibly returning to their human forms after defeating the Inbem. The final episode of Guyslugger is episode 20, which is a low episode count for an anime made during this time period, but according to Suzuki, this was due to poor ratings and toy sales. In this episode, the Inbem launch an all-out attack on Earth, Jiro the dog is fucking killed, and the Solon ship launches its final attack on the Inbem in space, but as they do, the episode ends with text on screen reading, "The End." There is some development since we see the Earth send fighters into space to help the Guyslugger, a sign of growth from their reluctance we saw back in episode 14, but the fate of the Inbem and the Guyslugger team is left entirely unspecified. The series has no actual ending. In the revised Ishinomori Hero Guide, the author suggests that if Guyslugger had come out just a few years later, it probably could have got a conclusion in the form of an OVA. Even just 3 years later, cancelled anime like Baldios and Ideon would get to complete their stories with theatrical films. Guyslugger was just a bit too early, landing at a time before there was a home video market, and so it fell into obscurity. The most notoriety the series has gotten is in 2020 when Toei uploaded 2 subtitled episodes to their YouTube channel, along with 70 plus classic anime and tokusatsu. To date, these are the only episodes of the show that have received subs, including fan subs. The official DVD release, while appreciated, shows signs of age as the audio is in pretty bad shape, even becoming inaudible at some points. Though, it does come with a neat booklet with sketches of the characters and various promotions. I like this one map where they show the Earth and locations are marked off telling you which episodes take place there. It did make me appreciate that the series tries to approach a new setting in every episode. Now here's a segment for the Guyslugger dude bros out there. Let's talk etymology. One of the biggest questions going into Guyslugger was, what the fuck is a Guyslugger? Well, here's what I found, and by what I found I mean educated guesses, and by educated guesses I mean guesses. I've searched through every available source talking about Guyslugger, and the only somewhat relevant information I can find about the title is in the art book Ishinomori After 1975, where they say the original title of the work was Earth Warrior Solon. This was changed to Glacier Warrior Guyslugger at some point in development, and the name just stuck. I think the reason it was changed to Glacier Warrior Guyslugger is because Ishinomori was very conscious of the environment, and at the time there was a fear that damage to the environment would lead to another ice age.
What scientists are telling us now is that the threat of an ice age is not as remote as they once thought.
This fear of Earth entering another ice age is brought up in other Ishinomori works like Hunter of Time. There doesn't even seem to be a consistent romanization. Sometimes it's Guyslugger, sometimes it's Guyslugger, sometimes it's Guyslugger, as if it's a guy who slugs people. It's worth mentioning that Ishinomori had a series much later in his career titled Voicelugger, about superheroes who use their voices as weapons. With that, I imagine lugger is meant to be the second word rather than slugger, and I believe the first word is geis, a combination of the word gai, meaning outsider as seen in the word gaijin, and aisu, meaning ice. Put this together and you get a team of outsiders from the ice. This is the best answer I can come up with, but I don't speak Japanese and I hardly speak English, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. And that's pretty much Guyslugger, a show that's not very good, doesn't have an ending, and there's pretty much no way to watch it. Hopefully you found this video incredibly helpful. Slop you later.